A very good morning to you all and welcome. Thanks for coming to this little webinar on virtual groups, specifically heights in virtual groups. This meeting is not going to last as long as the other one. It's quite a small and discreet little topic, and as always you're welcome to ask questions through the chat window and we'll get to them either through the meeting or at the end. I hope you can hear me okay. If you can't, again, let me know through the chat, but I think the microphone's pretty good. So welcome, thanks for coming. It's just after 8 a.m. my time. I'm not sure what time it is for you guys. I appreciate it's a little bit later than it used to be, courtesy of the time changes we've all had recently. So heights in virtual groups, we've done this in training. Why is it a problem? Or why do we have to address it? It's just the nature of virtual groups and transparent images. A normal image has a distinct frame around it. The edge of the viewfinder is the edge of the image, and if you do a comp or any other product, that's the edge of the image. And the edge of your product is the top, the sides, the bottom. With transparent images, you don't have edges. You may have a bottom edge because you've photographed someone 3/4 of a length or half length, but if you photograph them full length, you don't even have a bottom of a frame. The bottom is their feet. The top of the frame is actually the top of their head. The left and right would be their shoulders. And you can see that's going to be different for each person because different people are different widths and different heights. And how that manifests when we come to virtual groups is that everyone ends up the same height when you place them in a virtual group. So let's see the problems, best shown by way of example. So here we've got quite a nice virtual group from one of our customers. They are a bunch of volleyball girls. They've been shot 3/4 length. You can see they've been photographed to about their knees, green screened through our software. So the images are transparent, and we've used NeoComposite to make this virtual group. And I'm particularly emphasizing straight line virtual groups because it is easier to see this issue, but it applies to a normal looking group as well. So that's fine, nothing wrong with that, except you may get a parent complaining because the true heights of the girls, if they were standing that way and you had photographed them in a normal one shot in one frame, as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 8 different shots pieced together in NeoComp, they actually look like that, which makes sense because not everybody is the same height in real life. And you can see we have 3 quite tall girls and the rest are shorter. So that is how it really looks, except that is what you'll get by default when you put together a virtual group in NeoComp in automated software. Of course, if you do it in Photoshop, you can play around it for yourself, but obviously you've got plenty of time up your sleeve if you're going to do this in Photoshop. So that's what we want to end up with. We want to end up with their true heights being reflected in the virtual group, and there's a couple ways to do that. Another example, this is a rotated comp. We've got the main guy in the middle and his teammates, his baseball teammates in the background. And you can see again, by default, they're all the same height. But in reality, even with a rotated comp, that's what they look like. The guy in the middle, the rotated, the main image stays the same, but in reality, the guys at the back are varying heights. They are not all the same height. So how do we achieve that? Okay, so I hope you appreciate the problem. I think if you've joined this meeting, you already know this is an issue, that with virtual groups, transparent images, the issue is heights end up being the same. Everybody ends up looking the same height when they're all pieced together. And that may or may not be the problem. That may be something you think, oh, that's a great result, because if I photographed them in real life, I'd be putting bags of wheat, sandbags underneath the short guys to prop them up to be the same height as the little ones, as the big ones anyway. So maybe that's what you want. But on the other hand, if you get parents complaining because their tall kid looks short or looks the same size as the shortest kid in your baseball photos, then that's an issue that you're going to need to address. And there's 2 ways of doing it. Broadly speaking, there's two ways of doing it. The solution, you can either handle it through photography or you can handle it through our software. Obviously, through our software is where we come in, but it would be remiss of me not to explain how to get proper heights purely through the photography, and then you don't need to do anything with our software, or any other software for that matter, probably. Okay, so let's have a look at a bit of a mock shoot. You see, the issue is in photography, we have been trained all our lives to fill the frame. By default, when you photograph people, you tend to fill the frame. If that's a head and shoulders, if that's a half length or a 3/4 length or a full length, in your photography, in camera, you tend to fill the frame so that you don't get acres of space, wasted space all around them. And it's very hard to break that habit in your photography. Not only that, but you may need a tight head and shoulders, as you may also need a half length for trader cards and memory mates and all your other products. You might need a tighter head and shoulders for ID cards, but then your virtual group that you've got in mind, you may need that to be full length. So you may need to take several shots, which requires you zooming the lens. So the photographic solution relies on this. It relies on a fixed lens, or if you have got a telephoto lens, a zoom lens, you must not zoom it in, and a fixed subject. So X marks the spot where the kid stands, Y marks the spot where the camera stands and does not zoom. And as long as those two things never change, the heights are always going to be correct. You frame the first shot for the tallest kid, so you don't chop anyone's heads off. You frame the first shot for what you think will be the tallest kid. Leave your lens there from that point. And then if everybody stands in the same spot, it stands to reason that the tall kids are going to be higher up in the frame than the shorter kids, who will be lower down in the frame. That's just logical. But as I said, it may not be practical. So let's continue looking at the photographic solution. Here's a mock shoot. We've got the viewfinder, the camera viewfinder, and this is we've done here with this camera exactly as I've described. You can see the 4 subjects, Mr. Grey, Mr. Pink, Mr. Yellow, and Mr. Brown, are all standing pretty much in the same spot. The camera has not moved. We've not tilted the lens. We've not zoomed the lens, and it just follows, therefore, that the tallest kid, Mr. Grey, is the tallest one in the frame, and the shortest kid, Mr. Brown, is the shortest kid in the frame, and it all works happily. As we're about to see, it all works happily with your virtual group. On the other hand, most people end up doing this, and it's a very hard habit to break in your photography as well. You'll tend to fill the frame appropriately because we have been taught that way. It's in our DNA to crop correctly with our photography, and then everybody is the same height in your images. Let's have a look how that all plays out in NeoComp. So that's our first shoot, where we have our 4 kids and we had filled the frame with them in our photography, and that's what you would normally do. Or if your cropping was not perfect in camera, you ended up cropping them in here to be consistent. That's what you normally do. And then the way that plays in your virtual group is like that. So you can see they've ended up the same height because they started the same height, but that's not necessarily, as we know, how they are in reality. If we go back to images mode, the other way, if on the other hand, when we photographed them, we did as I said, we had them standing pretty much in the same spot and they didn't move, and you had the lens and the camera in the same spot and the lens was not zoomed or tilted, then it stands to reason that the tallest kid will be higher up in the frame with his head, and the shorter kid, his head will be lower down in the frame. In other words, the tall kid will be tall, the the short kid will be short, and then when you form your virtual group, you get that instead, which reflects their correct height. We've done nothing special in the software. In the settings, we have not even ticked relative heights. We are not correcting heights in the software, which is the second solution. At this point, we've only addressed it through the photography. So, stick figures being cute. This works in reality. It can be done in reality. So here, this is a real life example, quite a talented photographer in my opinion. He has photographed different crops, but he was, I think, good enough, skillful enough to be able to come back to the full length that he was going to use for the virtual group. And you can see pretty much they're standing in the same spot each time. These images have not been touched. They have not been cropped in or outside of our software. So what you're seeing there is the full frame image. This is what you saw in the viewfinder. So they're standing in the same spot. The camera has not moved. And you can see that the taller kid is higher up in the frame. This guy, for example, Ken, his head is higher up the frame than Angela, who is lower down. Ken is taller than Angela, and that's the way they were photographed. And when we get to showing the virtual group, that's the virtual group. Quite a nice looking virtual group. You can see the heights are correct, relatively speaking to each other. They're correct. The photographer has been creative enough to envisage the virtual group during the photography or before the photography and has posed them accordingly. So we've got a variety of poses to make it look as natural as possible in the finished product. And I think he has done a good job there. He's also slightly pushed them forward and back in photography, not a great deal. So yeah, the girl in the middle there, you can see she's standing a little bit further forward than the guy next to her, which probably makes her look a little bit bigger, but not a big deal. It's not like she moved feet. She moved a few inches forward, or he moved a few inches back, and that also helped in getting the randomization, the variability that makes it look more natural. So it can be done in photography. We haven't done any mathematical manipulation in NeoComp to get the correct heights here with this full length. Now I'm showing you a single straight line virtual group because it is easy to see the heights, but it can be done also. It applies to a more traditional looking group. If we go to the next page, this will take a little bit of time to draw, so bear with us there. With all the things running on my computer, I'm running out of CPU. You can hear my hard disk churning away there. So as that draws, you see the photographer, same photographer, again has photographed the kids individually with the finished product in mind. So apart from the casual pose, which was pose 3, which was used for the straight line virtual group, the casual group, he has also taken some of the kids sitting down on a chair, on a green screen background, and the other kids standing up in a more formal and traditional manner with hands behind their backs. So each kid got 3. Well, the kids sitting down had their pose 1 was on the chair, and then we had pose 2 was the kids behind with their hands behind the back. Pose 3 was the casual shot, which enabled the photographer to offer a traditional group done this way, as well as the more casual straight line group. They're both virtual groups. So here's an example of we've used the same techniques in the photography where subject and camera have not moved, focal length of lens has not changed. Naturally, therefore, the taller kids will head up higher up into the frame. They appear taller in the virtual group. Now we may end up sorting this by height so that all the kids are in the back row and so forth, but I deliberately left it sorted like this so we can see the variation in the heights, and it all works. But let's have a look at the other solution, which is to use our software, use NeoComp, together with some height data. So I go back to this particular job, and let's have a look at those volleyball girls. So you can see the way they've been photographed is more likely what you're going to do. More likely you're going to photograph them. In this case, they were photographed 3/4 length, could have been a half length. And you filled the frame, so you can see their heads are pretty much all at the same distance from the top of the frame. There's no real frame as we know. But we saw in the real result that, for example, Aria, this girl here, is a lot shorter than Sam in real life. But with traditional photography, where we have filled the frame, we've either cropped the images in NeoPack, or we've cropped the subject when we photographed. You can see that Aria's head is going to be at the same point as Sam's head, and we get the result that we don't particularly want. And that's the same with the baseball guys. There's a bit more headroom there, which is probably safer, but you can see the tall kids and the short kids are all going to end up being the same height in your virtual group. Their heads are all at the same distance from the top of the viewfinder. So what do we do? How do we then handle that in the software? Well, it can be handled in one or two ways. If I go back to the slideshow and go back a couple of steps, through the software we're going to need height data. If you have height data for the kids, we can make use of that. That height data could be their actual height, 5'4", 5'8", 176 centimeters. It could be imperial or metric and in different formats. But if you have that absolute data, if you have their actual heights, we can make use of that. The software will do its calculations to make the tall kids look taller and the shorter kids look shorter, because it knows what their real heights are. Or we can use some sort of relative height indication. Now, how do you get that height data? I don't know. To be honest, a lot of you who are doing sports photography get that anyway, because you need it for trader cards and whatnot. So you're getting that information somehow. It is quite conceivable that you get it during photography by using, let me show you, some sort of tape measure. Whoops, I just found there it is there. So, just to give you an idea, I just found these in Google Images. Just have a tape measure or some system like they use for security video. You'll see a strip like this at a door in a 7-Eleven, for example. So in case they get robbed, they can tell you that the robber was 5'8", etc. So you just grab yourself one of these systems or make your own, calibrate it, and have it near your photography setup. So as the kid walks past it, before or after the photography, somebody is noting their height. It could be their exact height, so they can note that this kid is 180 centimeters or 5'10", or it could be just relative. They could be an A, a B, a C, or D, or an E, or an F, where we know that A might be 150 centimeters or 5'2", and a J could be 5'11", and it will extrapolate in between. So let's have a look at those two methods. But of course, you're going to need to get that information somehow. So it's going to be up to you how you get that information. If we go to details mode, let's go to details mode. And the baseball team. We've got a column, we've got a field called height. And it's not any old field. Yes, it's called height, but it could have been called anything. The important thing is it has the special property of height. We know fields can have special properties. The first name field, no matter what you call it, has a special property of first name. So we always know that that field has the subject's first name. The ID field has a property of unique. So that is your unique field. So no matter whether you call it ID or not, we know that that information in there is unique for the subject. The height field, no matter what you call it, we will know that it has height data, and NeoComp can then use that height data. We define that field just like any other field. We can either do it at the job level, which is what I'm going to show you now, and give it the special property of height. Okay, or you can do this in TS admin as well for SQL jobs. So you're going to need that field, whether you call it height or not. Probably best if you do. The important thing is you give it the special property of height, then we know that that field has height data. And you pop the height data in there, however you got it. I don't know how this photographer got their data from the kids. It is in the format 5 foot 11 inches with the dash in between. We support different formats. This is quite a popular format, I've been told, because when you use then at height on a trader card, for example, you'll get the height in that format, which is how you want it. But I believe it could just be 5-11 without the inch and feet symbols. It takes centimeters. We could have 172 cm for centimeters, or it could just be 172 without the centimeter extension. But I've just left it there because that is what the photographer gave me. That is the real heights of the kids. So we've got our height data now, but before we go to form pages mode to build our page, there is another little step we need to do in between. Remember at the beginning of the meeting, I said the issue with virtual groups with transparent images is that the images now don't have a predefined top, bottom, and left and right for that matter. With normal solid images on a solid background that aren't transparent, it's easy. The top of the image is the top of your viewfinder frame, the left and right are obvious, and the bottom of the image is the bottom of your frame. But once you knock out the background, with a transparent background, that's no longer the case. The top of the image now is not going to be the top of the frame, the top of what you see in the viewfinder, but the top of the image is going to be the person's head. The bottom of the image, if you're shooting full length, is going to be the person's feet. So we need the software to go and find those edges, to go and find the top and the bottom of each frame. Then it can apply the height data and draw the subject appropriately at the appropriate height on your finished composite page. And we do that step in images mode, which is where I am now. It's really easy. You've got another tool on the toolbar. There, next to the chroma key tool, is the image height tool, which I'm hovered over now. Just select an image. I'll just do it for one image at the moment. Select an image and hit image height tool. And that brings up a little toolbar with just one option on there, heights detect. So detect the height. And it's just done that for the first image. So what it does is it finds the top of the image and the bottom. The bottom of the image for these is easy because they're shot half length, 3/4-ish. So there is subject matter there. But if it was full length, it would come up from the bottom and find the subject's feet. So for these images, we're really trying to find the head, where the head is. And that's depicted by the red line. So it comes down and it finds the top of the head, then goes down a little bit, because remember, we're shooting a 3-dimensional image onto a 2-dimensional plane. So it comes down a little bit to be the equivalent of the middle of the head. To do them all, I only did one image at once, but to do them all, just select all, hit detect, and it goes through and finds the top of the frame, top of the image, and the bottom. It does that for all the images. Now, if for whatever reason what it finds is incorrect, you can manually adjust it. You can just grab the red line and move it up and down as appropriate. You can only do that if, for example, for some reason it's found a bizarre top of the head. It might be that the person is wearing a hat, a helmet, a Harry Potter sorting hat, or a witch's hat, and therefore it finds that instead of the top of their heads, in which case you can just drag the height to where it should be, and you can do the same with the bottom. but in my experience, by and large, it just does it as you see there. We can do it for the volleyballers as well. So this time I'll just select everybody all at once, Control A, detect. And it goes through and finds the bottom and the top, and it comes in from both those two extremes just a little bit. You can manually adjust them if you need to do so, but normally you don't. More relevant perhaps, or another example will be to show you the images in this one. Okay, if we did it here, now here remember we don't need to do this in this job because they were photographed correctly. They were photographed without zooming or moving the subject. But let's say we didn't do that. Again, if we do the image height tool, you can see here it's found the head and the middle of the feet, the sole of their feet. So now that we know where the top of the frame is and where the bottom is, and we have height data, we can now go and form our page and apply that information to get our finished virtual group with the appropriate head heights. It's baseball, wasn't it? So there's baseball. It's a rotated comp. You will see that as I rotate through, the main guy at the front rotates through, and as you are familiar with, the other kids rotate with him. The important thing is now note that the kids are the same height behind him, and they shouldn't be because they are taller and shorter. We need to go into the settings, and we have a little checkbox, relative heights. Activating that, then it's asking you where to place the tallest head in the frame. Because remember, we're still using a subject block and a page layout in NeoComp. So we are going to place the head, in this example, 1% from the bottom of the image hole in your subject block. I hope that's not too confusing, but as you know, a subject block, you see a preview of it there. In this case, the subject block is completely filled with an image hole, and we're just saying place the tallest head 1% from the top of the image hole in your subject block, and then everybody else gets calculated relative to that. And you can also do the same for the feet. You can move them up from the bottom of your image hole. Feet, there's not always feet in the shot, so the bottom of whatever your frame is, be it knees, hips or feet, place that at a certain percentage up from the bottom of the frame. It's a sort of thing, hard to explain, easiest when you're doing these. The best way is just to play around with those numbers. It doesn't take you long, and just see what works for you for the comp in question, given where you've got other things, other elements on the page. So I've left that at 1%. I think 0 just worked just as well. And turning that on, you'll see now the heights reflect what we have in details mode. There wasn't a big variation, and that height has then been used. The software has done its magic behind the scenes very cleverly to adjust the heights in the finished comp to reflect their true height data that's in details mode, and we get that. And as you can see, when we rotate through with the rotated comp, the rotated guy, the heights do not apply. The main guy in a rotated comp, as it should, he will stay always featured and at the same size. But it's the other subjects, the fixed subjects behind him in this case, where the height data is taken into account. And it just makes it just look, you know, natural and normal, which it is. Let's have a look at the volleyball girls. Okay, so at the moment, if we go to settings, the relative height checkbox is not checked. How are we handling them? We're handling them a little bit differently. If we go to details mode, in the height column, now we don't have absolute data in there. We have just made the shortest girl an A and the tallest girl a J. So that's 10 increments, 10 increments of an inch each. How do I know it's an inch each? What we do is then tell the software what the A is. We need to tell the software what the two extremes are. So we tell it that A equals whatever, J equals whatever, and it extrapolates in between. You set those parameters in images mode, edit height settings, the height indicator extremes, or the indicator of extreme heights. So we are telling it that code A corresponds to a height of 5'1", and code J, so 10 letters later, corresponds to a height of 5'10". And then it knows that a B will be 5'2", a C will be 5'3", and so forth. We do not need to use letters. We do not need to use A and J. We could use 1 through to whatever as well. And so here we just need the extremes. We still need to know relatively where they are, and that might be easier in photography if instead of having a tape measure with real height increments on there, which may be hard to read. You may have something color coded that they just walk past, and as they walk past, you note that this kid's a blue, and you know that blue corresponds to a D value, for example. Yellow is the shortest, and that's going to be 5'1". So that might be easier to have a relative height indicator pole at your photography site, and you just note whether the kid is an A through to J, rather than try to jot down their exact height. That's going to be up to you. In practicality, in practice, when I've talked to people, or from what I've seen, sample jobs, people are getting real height, whether they're getting that at photography with a proper height strip, or whether they're getting it some other way, whether the subjects are telling them the height. They seem to be using the other method where they put in the exact height into details mode, because they need that information later on. They need that information for other products, so they may as well get it. They're going to need it anyway. But this is the alternative. In here you enter the extremes. In this case, it's going to be A and J. Our extremes are 10 inches apart, 5'1" to 5'10". And then in details mode, in the height column, we just need to put what they are, an A, a J, or anything between. We can see we've got two girls that are 5'10", J, and the A corresponds to 5'1". We've got a B, a C. We don't have an E, an F, or a G. So there's a bit of a jump going from Eloise to Selena. Then we do the same thing in pages mode. We just need to go into set details, tick the relative heights option. Here I've put the percentage a little bit lower, so it's 5% from the top, pushed them down a little bit, and you can see why. Just move that out the way a little bit, just to make sure their heads didn't hit the graphics. Hit OK, and it's worked in the same way. It's worked in the same way as had we had absolute data for each of the girls. And you can see the two tall girls, the shortest girl, and then so forth. Everybody is now correctly positioned in respect to height in the vertical plane. That is really it. You can see it's actually quite simple from a photography point of view, or from the software point of view. It's even easier in a software point of view if you've done the photography to take this into account. But as we mentioned earlier, it may not. That may not be practical. It may not be practical to get proper heights in the photography, and you run the risk of breaking it if halfway through the shoot the photographer makes a mistake or forgets and starts zooming. Then you're in trouble, because you maybe don't have the system in place to get the height information, and you've got half the images which may be properly framed and the other half not, and then what do you do? It's a bit messy. So I think that the software solution is needed if you can get that height data. But by all means, if you have the skills and the patience and the techniques to do it with photography, you can do it that way as well. So, to me, the key with virtual groups is having a vision before you go out on the shoot of what you want the virtual group to look like, and then you photograph accordingly. Don't go out shooting as if you're just going to be shooting for 8x10 portraits and ID cards, and then make a virtual group out of that. I think that tends to look too mathematical, too computerish. Have an idea in your head before you go out to photography, what you want the finished virtual group to look like, and photograph them accordingly. Think to yourself, if I was to photograph this group as a proper group, using Neo Group or whatever, just a normal group photo, how would I be setting them up? How would I be posing them? And then you need to take the individual shots with that in mind. Now, it could be that you want a formal group at the end of it, as we saw with the traditional looking school group. Therefore, you photograph them pretty much straight up and down. However, my experience, or my opinion really, in these sort of straight line groups is that with a bit of randomization to make it look more casual, I think is a better product, probably a better seller perhaps, than had they been posed identically. Because in reality, if you're photographing school kids at that age, you're not going to get them standing identically to begin with. So we don't it's probably not a good idea to try to replicate that artificially through software. So yeah, that's my 2 cents worth, is think about how you want the thing to look like before you go out and photograph it, whether you're doing it with heights or not. So unless there's any more questions, which there don't appear to be, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us. I hope you found the webinar useful, and we'll see you all again in the next one. Bye for now.